Hello, my name is Diane Buglioli, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director at a very special place here on Staten Island. We provide services to individuals with developmental disabilities. But today I'm here as the co-chairperson of the Willowbrook Property Planning Committee, which is a committee of the Staten Island Developmental Disabilities Council. That council is the primary advocacy group here on Staten Island for individuals and their families with developmental disabilities. That council and CTV have sponsored this series, Willowbrook Revisited, which is a retrospective look back at Willowbrook State School, the property it was on, the people who lived there, the people who worked there, the events that happened because of it, and the society in which it existed. We've had so many shows thus far, covering so many different areas, talking about the property itself, talking about institutionalization, the history of that. We've had advocates that were there. We've had people who were involved in the Willowbrook research, looking at the Willowbrook research in terms of hepatitis. And today with us, we have a group of women, not a group, two women, who are both activists. And one is a colleague of mine from the council, and that is Laura Kennedy, who was here when we did the show with Willowbrook Goodman. And Laura is the director of the Early Childhood Direction Center. She sits with me on the council as the co-chairperson of the Education Committee. And she is the president of ARC. Laura, I'll leave the explanation of ARC to the audience from you.
Oh, well, the ARC has a long history in New York State. It began in 1949 as the Association for the Help of Retarded Children, NICE ARC, and just recently rebranded to be the ARC of New York and affiliate with the National ARC. And there are 47 chapters around the state, founded by families, governed by families, to provide a menu of services for people with disabilities.
So it's probably the largest, I would probably venture to say it's the largest
in the state and
service provider here in New York State.
Yes.
And all of us that work in the field now, Laura is a parent as well, of a daughter with a disability, Julia. But as professionals, we all stand here and feel sit here and feel very honored to have with us today Diana McCourt. Diana is one of the original plaintiffs. We've talked in the past about the consent judgment, the federal court mandate that was a result of the court case against Hugh Carey, who was then governor, by what was then NISARC.
NISARC and other plaintiffs. And
the plaintiffs, which included Diana.
On behalf of my daughter.
On behalf of her daughter, Nina.
Right.
Murray Schneps, who was here in a number of shows ago, as well as Willowbrook Goodman, who was here. So with us today, we have to complete that triumvirate of pain that the state felt back so many years ago, Diana, Murray, and Willowbrook, who through the years maintained friendships, I guess.
Yes, yes.
But Diana also is an activist, I think, and I think you're born an activist. It's from like West Side Story. When you're a jet all the way. And I think when you're an activist, it's part of how you approach your life. And Diana was also involved as the co-founder of Women's Share, which was an exchange for skills and services by women in the 1990s. Before we get to the real heart of the show, tell us a little bit about Women's Share.
It was called, I read about something called time dollars, which is a way of people purchasing services on an equal basis with each other. In other words, a lawyer might give some time and that lawyer earns credit, and then the person that spent the credit with the lawyer may be earning credit back from doing washing for somebody, or it could be ironing, or it could be just going with them to the doctor. Their time was equal.
Like bartering, like a bartering system.
Well, barter is a little bit different, but this is like a bank.
Okay,
You're accumulating time hours, and you're spending your time hours. So it started in 1991, and it started with about 20 of us, and it grew to 100. And then we stopped it because we were meeting people's homes and living rooms. But we were linked to this kind of effort that was going on throughout the country, really the world. There were many, many of these, and there still are. And this group still exists. They, now
wonderful.
older people, and they tend to be helping each other with things that occur when you're older, like going to the doctor or getting information about medical things, or just going to the theater together, or finding out what's good in the movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so that was a very sad. But I also was a cabinet maker and organized a business called Dovetail that did renovations and made cabinets. And I was involved in the daycare movement when my daughter was very little, when other kids were very little. You can really change things. I felt empowered in that way because I had been involved in change making.
Yeah. And as I said in the beginning, and Laura and I and hundreds of others and thousands of others in the field are so gracious.
Deeply grateful.
So
to
grateful
your
to you for that
mentor.
way in which you approach life, because it's been a mentoring from afar. We've seen what you've done and hope to emulate it as we move through at times. But it's so important for the audience, I think, to get a sense of what the times were like, a sense of the texture of the times for you back then, when you first had Nina. Give the audience a sense of it.
Yeah, of course, each of our stories are different, but I was married to a professor. We had a child, and at first we didn't realize anything was different, but my daughter didn't nurse well. And also when I took her outdoors, she would have this high-pitched scream. She would scream just because of the change in light, I think, or was uncomfortable for her. Eventually, I moved out because we weren't getting along. He felt very uncomfortable with the situation, this baby that wasn't acting properly. And but I did go see somebody at the Masters Children Institute, a Dr. Emanuel Furno, who was famous for a new thing called autism, for a newly diagnosed thing called autism. So I went several times, and the prevailing theory at the time from him was that this autism was caused by iceberg mothers, that mothers were not nurturing enough, so that, anyway, I called him after meeting there several times, and he wouldn't come to the phone. He wouldn't tell me anything, but finally I got the secretary to go and get him. And he got on the phone and he said, "It's hopeless, sorry."
Wow.
But my daughter, I began to search for her help, and she did. She was very slow in developing walking. She didn't speak at all. She spent a lot of time playing with a crinkly paper. And we both, taking her to the playground was very difficult because she'd start screaming there or at the grocery store or anything. So I became more and more isolated. My friends didn't really understand. They were mostly singles and they were trying to make their lives. So we were both getting very, very isolated. And speeding through some time there, I got involved with this. I've told this story in other places, but a very crazy Irishman, a very warm-hearted and boisterous guy.
I wonder who that might be.
And he spent time with Nina. That was so beautiful. He played with her, and she got her laughing. He would sing to her, and she started opening up in ways that had never I'd seen before. And it was the first time I felt somebody was there to enjoy Nina as well as me. And so that started our road of hope, because he had a friend who was an administrator at the Shield of David. And so they had one program that lasted 2 hours twice a week, and it would take me 2 hours to get there by public transportation. And so I took her there, and there were other mothers, about 5 other mothers, and we all sat in the waiting room while this 2-hour program went on. And that was the first time I felt I had allies.
Yeah.
I had allies.
And this is like 1960,
Early
1960s, early 1960s in terms of
about
time.
1963, 4. So with that, I began. Then that program told me to put Nina in an institution, and everybody was telling me, "Look, you're still young. You're still go on with your life and put your daughter away." That was everybody's advice to me. So I wangled some money from an uncle, and we did find a private home for her. Meanwhile, I had 2 more children with Malachi, and they were very demanding. And also his son came to live with us because of his problems.
Yeah, for the audience, this boisterous Irishman was Malachi McCourt.
Right. So I did find a private home for her that failed because the woman became ill, and then that had like 10 children in it, and then another place in Westchester that finally rejected Nina as too incapable of following their program. So there was no public school education, there was just nothing. I couldn't afford full-time help, which is really and I had a part-time job.
Yeah.
So I heard about Willowbrook, and you have to go to Willowbrook. So that was the next step, which was a horror to me, but I just was desperate. I really felt I was losing my emotional control of my life. I was just really having a breakdown. So we did make an appointment with, it was either a social worker or an administrator, I'm not sure. But he said, well, we don't have any room. It's terribly overcrowded. We just can't take any more people. But there is an option, which is something called the hepatitis program run by a very well-known doctor, Dr. Saul Krugman. And the children are really much better off being in this little program because they're going to have their own room. They're probably going to get the vaccine that will prevent them from having the hepatitis that is rampant in the institution. And it's probably a wise thing for you to do. Mm-hmm. So I unquestionably was terrified about it, but he convinced me that it was a safe option. And so we brought Nina there in 1971. We visited every week like we were allowed to on a Sunday afternoon, but Nina would come out just in a daze. They would bring her out. I wasn't allowed in the back rooms.
Allowed in the back rooms, yeah.
I guess I'm not sure how many people at a time, maybe 20, 30 people were in it. And she would be in a daze. She was totally tranquilized out, I guess. She just would rock from one foot to the other, looking into space, and she hardly recognized us. And she also had developed a rash, which I knew she was allergic to a certain drug called Paxil, but they evidently had given it to her, and even though I told them, and so she was covered with red rash. But finally, it was time to get her out of there. I think she was there for about 2 months, 3 months. And she entered the children's building at Willowbrook.
Yeah, and which building was that?
I think it's 77.
I think you're right. I think that
yeah,
was called
yeah, I
the
think it was
HIP
building
unit
77.
at that time. Yeah.
And my mother helped me bring her and her stuff there, and my mother was supportive, but she looked around. I looked around and saw a terrible thing. It just seemed so barren, and so many children and so few helpers. We went into kind of the school part of it. It was supposed to be where the kids came to the center room. It was not a separate place. It was just the center room. And she saw some pictures of Mickey Mouse on the wall. She said, well, it's at least a little cheerful with the pictures on the wall. It's just the kind of thing, when people see something like that, they can't, the reality of it doesn't seem to enter them. And I found out later that the whole concept was very hard for people to admit existed. And if it had existed, it was because those people don't know the difference. I've been told that many times. At that time, I was told.
They're all wondering why you have that key on you.
Oh, yes.
So I think
Well,
you should, maybe we'll
I'll
start
just
there.
quickly run through how I got. We were taken on a tour of a couple of buildings by a social worker, the new parents were, and I was horrified. Even by the best of what they showed us, I was terrified. But this person had a long ponytail, and he looked like a kind of hippie type, so I figured to myself, this guy is going to know if there's a group of activists here, or if there's some resistance here, or some organizing going on. And it was true. It was Ira Fisher, who was a very active social worker there. And he pulled me aside. He said, shh, he said, I'll tell you later, okay? And so when the group had dispersed, he said, every Sunday there's a meeting of parents with one of the doctors, and that's where you should go. Okay, and then he told me some terrible stories to go with it. He said, you're right, this is a terrible place. So it was very hard for me to get there very often because I had to go by, once in a while we would borrow a car, but mostly public transportation, bus, ferry, all that. And but so I did start attending a couple of those meetings.
And this would be with Dr. Bronston and Dr. Wilkins.
Well, Dr. Bronston started coming to these meetings later, but Dr. Wilkins had a Sunday meeting every Sunday. I think he had barbecues.
He spoke about the barbecues.
He was telling the parents what's going on, and they had a right to something better, and how it could be better. And so he was doing basic organizing. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, there was this duality there of parents who had the vision that something needed to change,
Right.
and parents who were struggling to just try and make it a little bit better where it was. Right.
And
so that was the Benevolent Society versus the activist parents who were meeting with Dr. Wilkins.
But I hardly ever saw parents before. I just want to point out the parents didn't have opportunities to be together, because you would go, you had to go to the building, you had to wait for your child to be brought out, and then get out of here. You know, either go sit in your car or sit on the lawn, or there's 2 or 3 wooden picnic tables you could sit at in good weather. So you didn't have the opportunity to talk to other parents. So those meetings grew and grew, and people started yelling and screaming, we've got to do something, we should organize, make a demonstration, write the go, tell people. We really had a belief if you told people, they would change it.
Right.
Like the governor, the head of the state government department at the time. Yeah. And then I went to some meetings at Dr. Bill Bronston's house, is where I met Bernard Carabello, the radical person that lived there, and some other workers, a couple of workers, and Mike Wilkins. And that's where some tough thinking started going on. What can we do? How can we organize? How can we bring this to a wider audience and so on? And out of that came the expose that Mike Wilkins brought an old friend of his named Geraldo Rivera. People, it's a long story, but people and parents met in a diner that day.
Tita's Diner on Victory Boulevard.
Right. And Geraldo and Mike went ahead with the camera crew and had a key like this. This is the key to the Willowbrook wards. And Mike had been fired by this time for meeting with parents, but he still kept the key. They hadn't taken his key away. So he opened up the doors for Geraldo, and it started the whole expose.
Yeah. It's just, you know, when you think back, having, being here today, and you think back of that push and pull with the administration and the parents at that point, you would think that they would be trying to enable families and help them through this transition while having this mission of bringing treatment to their child, right? And that was really absent. We've been able, Laura and I have seen letters that went from the administration to parents that was so spoke so poorly of the individuals that they were writing about. That whole mindset that was present there that really needed to change. And I know in some of the readings I did in some of the books, the Willowbrook Wars, and this one that I talked to you about before, What We Have Done, the oral history of the disability rights movement, there was at some point even the very direct action to have the administrator dismissed. And they credit some of that to your group.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
That was the, yes, we were trying to get him dismissed.
Is this Dr. Hammond?
This is Dr. Hammond, who's a psychiatrist. And at this time, remember, this is all run under the Department of Mental Hygiene. So people have to understand the context of it.
Yes.
The directors were really administrators per se. They were psychiatrists.
And people were patients, though this
And
came
people
under
were
the
at the
Department
time
of
they
Health
were
and Mental
patients.
Hygiene.
Patients. And not only patients, but items. They were called items.
But it's important to know, because where we transitioned from that was a significant accomplishment on the part of parents who then later on demanded the Office of Mental Retardation, at the time now OPWDD, to get away from that medical
model, if you will,
to what their children really needed and deserved.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to say the thing that really motivated, of course, what motivated us was the love of our children.
Yeah.
The love of our children and the pain that we were all going through. But what gave us hope and the energy to go forward was Bill, especially Bill Bronston, the Dr. Bronson, had many connections throughout the country, and brought in literature about what was going on in Kansas, what was going on in another country, in Sweden, places that had begun to develop community resources so that people lived in home-like environments and were involved in community activities and supported that way in small numbers. Mm-hmm. And it just made common sense to mothers, right? That came out of homes like that.
Sure, that's what you
right, and that's what they should have. Is apple pie. You know, it's the American apple pie. So he said. So he's the one that brought in doctors. He brought in other experts, and then put forth the vision of the class action. Mm-hmm. And it was very brave of many parents. They were terrified to join. They were mostly activist parents that had the courage to put themselves, because there was a great fear that if you took any steps towards giving information out or talking against the place, that your child would suffer for it.
Yeah.
You know, and there would be retribution. So that was very pervasive.
Very brave.
Or there was another group of parents that had been there for a long time and had made sort of friends with the administration, and their child got better bed placements. Yeah, things like that. So they didn't like the situation being rocked because they had figured it out for themselves.
For the audience to understand that, Maurice referred to the same thing in terms of bed placement. People saying, well, what could that possibly mean? Well, when there's a room full of 40 to 50 beds, you would want the bed placement to be as close to the front as possible so somebody could monitor, because the children on the back beds or the adults in the back beds were far away, and usually there wasn't even a pathway to get there. You'd almost have to walk on beds to get there.
Exactly.
So bed placement was very important. And Murray Schnaps, who was on the show before, had said that he went in to the administrator and had made a complaint. And he said, and if you dare move my child's bed, he said, and I went there the next day, and Lara was still up front, he said, and I knew that they weren't going to change her bed again because she needed extra care. Right. And so that's what Diane is talking about. I mean, there was the fear of a lot of different things because there was so few staff there that whatever attention could be paid to the children or the adults at that time, you didn't want any of it to be taken from your child, because it was usually spread one between 40 or two between 40 people.
Right. There was a crisis then because there was a wage freeze, there was a hiring freeze.
That's right.
And so the population had less, and then people would leave and they couldn't rehire. So there was less and less people to take care of so many people.
How did you get hooked up to the legal supports that were so...
Well, that was Bill Bronson
Yeah.
mostly. He contacted Bruce Ennis, the great
Yes.
civil
Bruce
liberties
Ennis, yes.
lawyer, American Civil Liberties Union, and
legal aid.
legal aid as well, legal aid. And they talked to us as a group of this alternative parent group, agreed to be plaintiffs. We had many, you know, the early part of the demonstrations and all that brought in tons of volunteer offerings. People sent clothes, and it just ended up to be heaps and heaps of clothes, communal clothes. Nobody had their own clothes. Even though you brought them, they never ended up on your child.
No.
So it was, could see it was a useless, going this way, it was a morass and it would just be a fix-it thing. And I came to very soon to realize, and many others did too, that we had to close it down. It had to be closed down. The institution was like a monster that was feeding itself, you know, that the people in it weren't as important as maintaining the institution. So that was the vision that we had to move out into the community. All people must have the least restrictive environment, a home-like environment, and you know, a human.
Yeah. Diana brings Bruce Ennis's name. It was from the Civil Liberties Union, right? Was he originally from the Civil Liberties Union?
American Civil Liberties.
American Civil Liberties,
Yeah.
right? And the actual consent judgment was based upon the Eighth Amendment of the Bill of Rights, freedom from harm. So it wasn't, it was just that people have the right to be safe.
Right.
And that's what that whole suit was based upon, that these people were not even safe.
Right.
Even the custodial nature of the institution wasn't
Right.
working. Forget about the treatment.
Right.
Forget about medical care.
Just
Safe.
Prevention.
And they weren't safe
Right.
there. So
Right.
during this time period, right, from 71 to 75, it must have been, I mean, the pressures you must have felt. I mean, I just want the audience to hear that. You have children.
yeah.
You
I had
you know,
two toddlers, really.
You have that
Yeah.
boisterous Irishman in the house
Yeah,
with you.
yeah, right. Who
And
worked
you-
nights in a bar.
Right,
you know,
he was a
yeah.
bartender for a while.
Yeah.
I mean,
But he also had a radio program,
yeah,
and he did a lot of reporting on this whole
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so now you have this life that you're living. Here's this life, and then you have all of the pressures and
Right.
stress of activism and
Right.
everything that it brings with it.
Right,
It's just,
right.
it's an amazing, amazing capacity on your part and the other
Well, the
other
other
parents that were
mothers, yeah.
involved. Just amazing.
So that's what I wanted to point out, that the fellowship was so important, because it's a very lonely thing, especially in those days, to have a handicapped person in your family and to take care of them, or even when they're in a place, it continues to be your work to take care of that child, because you need to watch everything that is going on and make, you know, relationships with people, taking care of them and making sure they understood that person's needs, and even checking for things like injury. At Willowbrook, you always check the body, have the body checked, because is that person been hit? Has that person got bruises or cuts? And, you know, always smelled terrible. She smelled of urine every time I picked her up. And giving her, when we were able to take her home, giving her a bath, that was the main thing, cleaning her, washing her hair, washing her clothes, not that they would be her clothes the
Because
next
they can't
day.
tell you what kind of day they had.
Yeah,
You can't communicate
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it tells you what kind of day
Well,
they
I
had.
think that probably, I think, is probably even more of a pressure on a parent when the child can't relate to you. So you have to, we talked a little bit about
Yes,
before, you
you
almost have
couldn't
to
talk
play
at all,
detective
yeah.
by looking, what physical condition is she
Yeah.
in? Is she more unhappy now? Is she reacting to the,
Or more zoned out because of being
Yeah.
on drugs,
Yeah.
which is what they used more and more of when there were less and less workers.
I think the drug of choice during those years was Thorazine,
Yes.
and it was terribly overused during that
Yes.
time. And that was
Yes.
one of the things that started to change very quickly after the consent judgment was the use of the psychotropic medications.
Right.
That was another real big change that came to the field, and I really believe you could track it right back to the consent judgment to see that change that was happening. But you talk about the fellowship and everything, and I thought to myself, what a interesting mixture of people.
Yes,
You were all from different places,
Yeah.
you lived in different places, different times. You shared the fact that you had a child that had special needs, and the powerful unit of people that you
Yes, it was.
became. You know, Murray talked about it as well. He said, I'm not sure that another group could have done what we did. And I said to him, probably the Times had something to do with it as well. Not the New York Times, but the Times.
Yeah, it's certainly
the
not the
societal,
New York Times.
the societal. We don't want to go there. The societal and
Right.
that fabric was changing
You
a bit
can't
then.
do it alone. I mean, the professionals couldn't do it alone. Wilkins and Bronston, as radical as they were, they couldn't do it alone. They need, you know, we all needed each other, and we all appreciated each other's willingness and passion to. I did, when I walked onto the campus, I said to myself, I can't fix things for Nina. I can't fix it because it's too big. You know, 5,000, over 5,000 people with all these. It has to be, change the whole thing. I have to change the whole thing. Not me, myself, but it has to be changed. And that's what we all began to understand and work for. You can't just fight to have your child not be beaten. It has to be for all the children.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just want to reflect back because things are coming together as you're talking about your experience at Willowbrook and my knowledge of what was going on with parents that had their children at home. And there's common ground what you're talking about in terms of every parent believed their child could learn. They really believed. But the other very poignant point is that caregiving can be so demanding on a family that, as you said, people said, you know, there's Willowbrook, it's a school, don't do this to your family. Families were guided by their religious leaders, by pediatricians, to do, that was what they considered the right thing. And so there was that struggle. And caregiving can be an enormous a challenge for a family to make sure everyone is okay. So having said that, as you started to look at, you know, the whole place had to be closed, I think everyone came on board and agreed and moved forward and said we have to close it, we have to, because language in, you mentioned special education came about. It was coming about at the same time I heard there was testimony during the Willowbrook trial that really fed into the right for free and appropriate education. So you're closing Willowbrook, you're starting special education in 1975, you're now building homes in the community, and you really changed New York. And a whole system of how you told government you need to do the right thing, and you need to have your own office for people with developmental disabilities, not under the Department of Health. And that you moved the system.
Because they're not patients.
They're not patients. And you did just that. You led the charge, and people followed and built with you.
Yeah, what always, you know, is so fascinating to me is, fascinating is probably not the right word, but I feel very passionate about it, is that so many people were telling you the opposite.
Yeah.
But what you felt, you follow what you felt inside.
Yes,
and
right.
I think people need to hear that. And, you know, somebody would tell you, no, this is absolutely the right way.
Right.
And everything they're telling you, well, it's going to have their own room, they're going to have this, but you're looking at it saying, this is not adding up.
Right.
This is not what Nina's getting. This is not what I want.
Right.
And I have to change it.
Right.
People, I mean, that's a special quality. I mean, we're so thankful for you.
Well, vision.
But it's the vision, but it's trusting in that inner self saying, this is not it, and I'm not going to allow it. It's going to have to stop. I just love, because when we talked before, and Diana just said, we got to close it. There was no halfway in this, because they knew this was not. We made a couple of changes here. It's not going to change. This system should not exist, and that was, that was
there
the
had been
vision.
experience of that, because when Kennedy came, Robert Kennedy came, and was horrified, and there was great attention to that for a few weeks.
Few weeks.
And
it died.
nothing happened after that because there was not this leadership or.
And I think you talked about the times. And when you think of that time, it was the right parents,
Right.
the right judge, the right Governor Carey coming
Right.
in, the right recipe to say, we can change this world. And you did change New York. I mean, this didn't happen in every state. They didn't have that same recipe of Diana and Mary and Willie Mae and the people and Mike Wilkins. It's an amazing story that does say it can be done. And you did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not everywhere.
Yeah. Today's parent, let me not go there yet. Let me ask this question for the audience. Laura, what Diana found herself, the situation she found herself in the late 60s, in mid 60s, I guess. When was Julia born?
Julia was born in 1982.
All right. So here we are in the early 80s. What's the difference?
Light years away. In only 7 years from 1975, Julia is born. Very similar infant development as Nina. And within a year, we walk into an infant stimulation program, like blocks from my home. And then UCP New York City with a preschool program. And it's amazing that all of that got put into place in a very short period of time. In 7 years, it was a totally different world for us. And then we also had OPWDD, thanks to the parents who said, we need that. And so we were guided by the support of OPWDD. The DD Council was already in full swing. Mm-hmm. Parents got information. And of course, being trapped on an island 7 by 14 miles isn't such a bad thing. When some good things are going on, you find out about them. And that was our world and most other parents, thanks to the tremendous work that was done just 7 years before that. There was that vision.
7 years after.
And it's, you know, I don't think in
judgment.
any other field or area in the country has there been such a positive movement as we start to look at now in 40 years, what we didn't have and what was going on and what we have now. But the feelings too of caregiving and understanding that you are a parent of someone who's going to need lifelong support to enjoy their life in the community. And after the anxiety, the sadness, it's what can I do to give my daughter the best life that we can? And so the toolbox was filled by the time Julia and my family were looking at what to do. And the toolbox still needs to be filled further. And we'll start to talk about the things we've accomplished and the concerns that we have. But caregiving, families do need that help. There's no question that government needs to come in and fund the good organizations that support their children for life and their family. And that was the tone at the time, that we were going to do this in New York. We're going to help families. We're going to have the right to not only not have harm, but to be in the community as an independent adult with the supports that they need as if they didn't have that disability.
Yeah. I mean, the audience knows we've spoken about how large the institution was built for, like 2,500 people or something like that, and ended up with 6,000 people in it.
Almost 6,000.
Around
Right.
6,000. And then the remarkable movement, really, of all of those people into what was supposed to be less restrictive settings. I remember back in those days when the first movement first happened, that people who didn't have families, they were at that time called non-correspondents. So the non-correspondents were moved in larger groups upstate into smaller facilities because they needed to meet this number for the courts, right? So they moved up there. So within a short amount of time, really, it got down to the size of 250 people at Willowbrook. So
By
that was like
1987?
1987. That's
I don't know exactly.
5,750 people.
Yeah, that was a
moved,
huge
right? Now you're
migration.
some migration.
But we had to, we and you and all the people involved had to keep vigil on that, because what was easier was bigger, you
That's
know, and it was very important. Mary Schnaps was one of the great fighters for the small home, especially because his daughter was very frail, and others that were going to live with her would be frail, but he was very passionate about keeping it very small.
No.
And because you do see, like when Nina first went into her group home, she had to do everything that the 11 other people did, because they, it took a long time for the institutional model to disappear,
Right.
even though it was out in the community, you know.
And 12 people seemed so small at that time.
Yeah.
It was a luxury.
Well, even
but
at that
now
time,
it's not.
people would move into, they would share bedrooms. Right.
Share bedroom.
And
yeah.
I remember as working in an agency that was offering residential services, when we first moved some people in that were Willowbrook class, if you will, which Willowbrook class for the audience are all of those peoples at the day of the consent signing, they lived in the institution, so they were followed with certain rights as part of the settlement. When they moved out, they would go into sometimes 2 in a room housing, right?
And two.
At least, well, you know, in our places we had 2, and it was okay, because, you know, it was a funny thing in the beginning for some of the people. They had never been in a single room, and it was frightening to some of them. It was so different, but they got accustomed to it, and we tried. I think a lot of agencies are trying to go, even people who were in sharing bedrooms, tried to get to single bedroom rooms. But when that whole thing happened with the deinstitutionalization, the people who lived at home were able to get into that movement, so that those people that were waiting for beds, so that they wouldn't put all of the Willowbrook class into one house together, but that it be with people who had lived in the community all their lives. So they really were each other's mentors in a way. But it had to be smaller. But Willowbrook really, to me, remains, it's a mindset.
Yes, it is definitely a mindset.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a mindset, because you can even have a 4-person,
Right.
and I know some of you 4 and under, 4, 3 best, you know. It can be that small, and still, depending upon how the staff are interacting with the individuals who are living there, it can be Willowbrook. So the training of staff and the education of staff is so important to get rid of that. I mean, there should never be a Willowbrook mindset, right? If we just treated everyone humanistically, we wouldn't talk about Willowbrook anymore. We wouldn't need to, but we need to still talk about it.
Yes,
And
we
think
do.
of the other institutions. It wasn't alone Willowbrook. You had Rome and
Yes.
Letchworth,
Oh.
and all over the state
Yeah.
were equal large institutions. And
Willowbrook
over
was just the
time,
largest.
They closed
That's what people
as
don't
well.
realize.
So it was the catalyst
Yeah.
to change. And think of the amount of community development with all of that, bringing us almost to where, 10 years ago, we could start to talk about the the changes from those good years.
And as
moving forward.
Diana said it earlier, this isn't the only state that this occurs in, and there are some states that still
Yes, they
use
do.
the institutional model,
I'm
which
sorry.
is
Yeah.
I'm having a
Which is-
coughing problem.
that's right.
I have to take one of these. I'm really sorry.
That's all right. We're okay.
We'll just cut through.
Comes packaged.
You're
Well, it's also-
prepared.
Yeah, it's also an emotional topic. Your throat's probably drying a bit too. Right.
I can't help but reflect back with you here, Diana, when we had the 25th anniversary here at the college, and our DD Council had orchestrated that and brought all these wonderful people back to really examine, so that people could learn how this was done and accomplished. And we had the panel discussions, which you were on, and I do recall meeting you in the Art Center, and you needed some time alone, because I think it was the first time you had come back
it was awful.
since you left, and it was a huge emotional experience for you. And you went out and you shared all of that with the families, and I think one of the biggest things from that was the 400 people that were there who didn't live those days but heard about those days and walked away from that event with a real appreciation of what didn't exist until these things occurred, all the players. And, you know, looking as we've come from that event, we have a lot of work to do with our families today so that they understand that it wasn't just handed to us. Parents had to fight for this, and unfortunately need to continue to advocate with our government officials because they hold the purse strings to the budget that makes all of this happen. And
well, whenever the purse strings get get connected to the the moral compass, it becomes it's such a distressing situation. Fiscal, is it fiscally sound to spend this money for this population? It just doesn't. It never rang true to me, and it still is a problem to me. When our moral compass is not dictated by dollars, that's a real problem for me always.
And Nina is in a like today is in a wonderful apartment with peers in Manhattan, and it took a lot of work and by you and partners to make that happen.
Yes, I'm actually on the board of JobPath, which is a very small agency that's very devoted to individualized services for people. But the interesting thing is, my daughter was in a group home run by the state that wasn't working very well, but it was better than Willowbrook. But she was hurting herself a lot. She was biting her wrists ferociously, and at one time had to wear a protective helmet to keep her from doing it off and on. She was terrified of the outside because she didn't get out that much.
Yeah.
But the day she moved into the apartment, it was like a miracle. She stopped biting herself. She stopped moaning all the time. She started learning the neighborhood and comfortably walking with her assistant all around the neighborhood.
That's great.
But it was an amazing transformation. It was such a testament to what change of environment, how important environment is.
Absolutely.
And so, and people used to have the impression that all people with disabilities acted out in strange ways, and a lot of it has to do with the fact they're living in an institution.
Well, I think that if they put all of us into a room with 48 other people and denied us of activities and treatment and interaction, I think we probably would respond in
So she is very happy. I can really say the word happy, even though she appears out to be. She has a modified way of being in the world, but she truly is happy.
And that makes you happy. When they're happy, parents are happy.
It gives you some peace of mind as well.
Yes.
Something that you had for many years. It was just had to be tremendous pressure for you.
Right. Still have to keep alert. But it's all I do. I mean, Laura's speaking to it so well. I do feel it's all in jeopardy.
Yeah.
I see how this agency struggles, and
I think we see. First of all, I thank you for sharing all of that with us, Diane. I know it's an emotional thing.
It is.
I'm emotional now. I'm starting to go off as well. But I think it's really important. I think we, with the three of us, know that unfortunately Murray, who was on in the 6th show, passed away probably around a month ago. And I think of that scene in To Kill a Mockingbird when the lawyer's leaving the building and the spectator says, "Everyone stand up, a great man is leaving the building."
Oh.
It's how I felt about Murray.
Yeah.
A great man, and I feel the same towards you and the other plaintiffs that were involved. But I know it's an emotional journey that you take with us and relive with us, and I appreciate that so much. And I think the audience will benefit from it, and I know that's why you do it, because I think to get rid of that concept of Willowbrook, I think we have to put it right in front of people and say, I'm an American. I lived in Manhattan a number of years ago. This is what I went through. This is what I went through. And I think, to protect families in the future and their children, that their children are empowered to live a life of value. And I love that you feel that Nina is happy, and I think that's an important thing. It's a tremendous accomplishment on your part. But what, for today's parents, Diana, what are you thinking about how things are looking to you? I mean, you're an astute woman, you're smart, you're an activist. What do you see?
What do I see they need to do?
What do you see? What do you see? What do you see as the situation that they're in right now?
The situation is there's a lot of so-called promise. There's a lot of verbiage, because people have learned to talk about individual rights and individual needs, and not just massive group needs. But they're very slow. In a lot of us have received wonderful services because we fought for them or were there at the right time and so on. But there are hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people sitting in their homes with almost nothing.
Right.
And, you know, I want you to speak about that.
Well, Diana and Malachi and 28 other advocates from around the state began signing on to a report to the governor, Keep the Promise. And it is a crisis in community-based housing for people with developmental disabilities. And I would venture to say 10 years ago, after many years of development, it wasn't perfect, but families could depend and make choices with their loved one on when they would live in the community as an independent adult, because all parents realize they're not going to be here forever, and give that child roots and wings. And government, through OPWDD, worked very well. My daughter entered a home in the community in 2002, which it's amazing, 15 years ago, and it was done in a thoughtful, planned manner, and many parents saw this system working and held back and said, when the time is right, we will do that. Well, now we have 11,000 individuals whose families are older that are getting shut out of that very quickly. We had several times when Governor Pataki had New York State Cares, because in 1998 there was a waiting list for permanent housing, and that opened up opportunities, and I think Julia is a beneficiary of that program. But it has slowed down, and we need to have Governor Andrew Cuomo really put us on the radar screen. OPWDD has been greatly diminished of its resources, its oversight to the kinds of programs we need. And this is really a wake-up call. We had the petition online. The report to the governor was written and shared with his staff. They agreed that there is a crisis, except we're not seeing anything being done about it. And we had 9,000 people sign on to this petition. And families, as Diana described, and I think every parent who goes through severe caregiving challenges, they're out there now. They're sitting there in their homes without a permanent house for their loved one. So this is the crisis for today. We're also going into managed care in New York State, which is beginning with care coordination in July. And, you know, no one is against using money wisely and managing our resources to the best that we can, but we need to have the resources to give people the lives that they deserve in this state. So we will hopefully see a system that supports individual services and choice, and moving us where there's better quality and better health care, but also that people are doing what they need and choose to do in the community with the supports of the non-for-profits, which are doing the bulk of the programs now, freed up and funded adequately. That's not happening now. So we're in a transition, and we need parents to assemble as they did before. We do have a law firm that is exploring the situation today. and we'll act accordingly if things do not change. But we're hoping that the governor comes around, and he's very good at managing crises, and he needs to bring more attention to this.
Yeah, one of the changes that happened, and you shared with us earlier when we were speaking, was the original legislation that created the Office for Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities, which is now the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. And because at the time it was under the Department of Mental Hygiene, but now we see this shift going into the Department of Health.
Yes.
And once again, the people that we are advocating for are not patients.
No.
And we have grave concerns about it going back under the Department of Mental Health, which meant, Department of Health.
Right.
And so we really need to also pay attention to that, focus on it, because we sometimes we get money allocated for people with developmental disabilities, but it goes into the umbrella and it really doesn't track down to our individuals. So it's going to be a complex situation, to say the least, and need of great advocacy once again.
We've always been using healthcare dollars. Medicaid is healthcare, and we've used, as I've said many times, Medicaid pays for all of the services my daughter has from the time she wakes up in the morning until she wakes up the next morning. It's going to the store, it's being supported. So I can, envision a managed care program that, if run correctly, could give managed care dollars into the agencies with some consistency and take care of that. I am afraid that OPWDD may be losing ground, and we as parents can't allow that to happen. We need OPWDD there as an ombudsman, as an oversight, and we need capital and monies for development of housing, separate and apart from the managed care services, whether it's a day program or health care. We need OPWDD to monitor that so people have a place in the neighborhood.
So that's our challenge.
That is this.
That's our challenge.
Keeping the promise.
Keeping the promise.
And as you know, when they closed Willowbrook, there's a plaque there the day they closed it that says, "A promise fulfilled." And there was a ceremony, and people got keys, and we closed Willowbrook, and you opened up doors of opportunity. So we feel that the promise is somewhat broken, and they need to keep that promise.
On that note, we have a challenge in front of us. We have great gratitude for the people that picked up the challenge then to give us.
She still is now.
And she still is now.
Yep.
She's still alive. She's
We're
a jet all the way.
learning from her.
Upcoming in our shows, we'll be having Commissioner Arthur, the former Commissioner Arthur Webb will be here, because he really was the person that really handled the deinstitutionalization, so we'll be talking about that. We'll be having some individuals that lived at Willowbrook, some individuals that worked, some present-day parents. I'm hoping to have Jane Kurtin here. I've been trying to speak with her. And our final show will be about the Willowbrook Mile. Thank you again to the audience for following the series. We've had wonderful feedback. Continued thank you for the council for supporting it, for CTV, and
Thank you.
Thank you,
thank
Diane.
you. Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you, Laura.
And that wonderful Irishman you married.
That wonderful Irishman you married.
He is.
Yeah.
He's a good advocate. Still.
You continue.